All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our last deep dive Bible study into the book of Genesis. We're bringing the book of Genesis to a conclusion tonight. Actually, we're not. It brought itself to a conclusion. We're just going to be studying it. But we're here at New Beginnings Christian and Missionary Alliance Church in Poughkeepsie, New York. I'm Pastor Danish House. And tonight is May 23rd, 24th, May 24th, 2023. We're had a nice day with a little bit of rain here at the end. Anybody know what's it supposed to be? Hey, Sue. What's the weather supposed to be tomorrow?
Nice,
Nice.
cool but nice. A little
And then-
windy in the morning.
Yeah, and the cool at night
Cool.
like tonight, but a beautiful weekend.
Oh,
Yeah,
good.
that's supposed to be rain till like next Friday.
Sweet. We have my daughter's graduation on Saturday, and it's going to be indoors over here in the church, but it'll be nice to have a nice weekend.
Yeah.
How are you, Sue?
I'm good, how are you?
Very well.
Looks like you've been in the sun.
No, actually, I was gonna say, I was in the hospital, but
Oh,
over the
no.
day,
Oh,
all kinds of crazy tests, but
everything's all
We'll
right.
hear more
I
about it.
think so.
Okay, good.
I said, so what happens now? I don't have a doctor appointment. I said, call your doctor in 2 days. Okay, I will. But I'm sure.
Well, good to see all of you who are here in person. Good to see all of you who are here by Zoom. And of course, if you're joining us by YouTube after the fact, welcome, welcome. If you need any materials for this course, send an email to church@newbeginningscma.org, church@newbeginningscma.org, and we will get those materials to you. And we're finishing up our manuscript tonight with the book of Genesis. It's going to be good. We're talking about what's next, right? My thought is that next will be the book of Mark, if that works for you guys. Gospel of Mark, switch testaments, go in and do some Jesus stuff. That would be fun. Book of Mark is one of my favorites to study in the manuscript method, and it would be a fun idea. So that's my thought. I'll be preaching on the book of Exodus starting in a few weeks. So we'll be able to pick up the threads from Genesis and that, and you guys will have greater insight into Exodus for having been through the Genesis course. So we've been doing this for over 2 years, the book of Genesis. So I'm like, there's a feeling of satisfaction that I have, also sadness. At least, sad to let Joseph go here. But very much satisfaction that we've made our way through the whole book of Genesis. Let's pray and we'll jump into our study today. Lord, thank you so much for bringing us together tonight. Thank you for this opportunity to study your word. Thank you for inspiring Moses or whoever it was who wrote this to write it down. And thank you for the truths that we've been learning through the book of Genesis. And I pray that tonight would be no exception, Lord, that you would send your Holy Spirit to fill us, even as you filled Moses, that we might hear your word well, we might understand your word tonight, and we would apply it to our lives. We thank you for your word. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, well, as always, we're going to follow our 3-step method of studying the scripture. First is going to be to look, asking the question, what does the text say? What does it actually say? Spending our time observing the actual text. The second is going to be to listen. Once we've seen what's actually there, we're going to ask the question, why is it there? What does it mean? What is the meaning of this text? What's the text trying to teach us? And then we're going to live. We're going to ask the question, how does this text apply to us, individuals? Why did God want each of us to hear this passage tonight? So we're going to spend the bulk of our time, though, in looking. So I want to take, if you haven't had the chance to study this text yet, I want to give you 5 minutes just to look at it. We're starting on page 95 of our manuscript, line 3. Jacob breathed his last and was gathered to his people. So we'll start with, then Joseph fell on his father's face. Okay, then Joseph, if I just read that part, it sounds pretty bad. But he found his father's face, and we're gonna go all the way to page 96, line 21. The end of the book. So take 5 minutes, read through it. You're looking for repetitions, comparison, contrast, cause, effect, who, what, where, when, why, how, anything that strikes you as interesting. Use your pens, pencils, and markers to mark it up and see what you can see. I'll stand back up in 5 minutes when your time is up. Greetings, Nicole. Good to see you. All right. So as you looked at this passage, what are some things that stood out to you? What did you notice?
The third part of God's promise to Isaac or Israel was fulfilled when he said that Joseph shall close his eyes in the first sentence when he fell on his face and wept over him and kissed him.
Right, so Joseph was there. God had promised to Jacob before he left the land of Canaan to go to Egypt. God promised that he would go with him, that everything would be well, and that Joseph would close his eyes, meaning that Joseph would be there when he died. You know, that indeed happens here. Yeah. So we definitely have God fulfilling his promises again.
Mhm.
And yeah, Sue, you seem like you had something you wanted to share.
Oh, I'm just gonna say Joseph was upset when his father died.
Yeah. So, I mean, Joseph, Joseph's feelings for his father, and he definitely loved his father, right? I mean, he had 17 years with his father at the beginning of his life, and then 17 years with his father at the end of his life. But it was a very different relationship in both cases, but here he's grieving his father's death, definitely. What else did you notice?
Well, now they're gonna take Joseph back to, Jacob back to Canaan.
So this is a major theme in this passage, right? Taking
Yeah, going back.
Jacob to Canaan. Why is this an important theme in this passage? Why does it matter to Jacob where he's buried?
Fulfills God's promise
Yeah.
to
Promised land.
return it to promised land.
All right, so Canaan is the promised land, right?
Mhm.
Canaan is the promised land, the land that God had promised to Jacob's forefathers and had promised to Jacob himself. And he wanted to be buried in the land of the promise. What else did you notice?
I noticed that he was embalmed.
Yeah, okay. So Jacob was embalmed. Why did that stand out to you?
Joseph,
Well, it's an Egyptian thing, not really where he came from.
Right, Jacob is an Israelite. They did not practice embalming. Embalming was an Egyptian practice. It's for the Egyptians, the idea of embalming was strongly attached to their understanding of the afterlife. We've talked about that before. They would embalm a person's body and they would bury them along with goods and their dogs and cows and whatever they would need to have in the afterlife, because the idea was that the afterlife was just a continuation of this life. So anything you needed in this life, you need in that life. And the only way to get it is to have it provided to you by your loved ones. Is that what Joseph has in mind here? Does Joseph believe the Egyptian view of the afterlife?
No.
he commanded it.
Joseph commanded it, right? Is it because he believes in their view of the afterlife?
No.
No.
It
Why
was
would you
just
say that?
it Had to bring Jacob to Canaan.
They needed to bring Jacob to Canaan, right? So this is, I mean, we all know what happens to a dead body, right?
Yes.
And especially if you're in hot places like Egypt and Israel, right? The journey from Egypt to Canaan was going to be a long one, and a human body starts to decompose right away as soon as you die. And the smells start, and the gases start, and the decomposition, and the flies. We got a fly going around in here. Nobody died, as far as I know. So for Joseph, the embalming was a practical matter,
Very
right?
practical.
We're gonna embalm him so that we can bring him to the tomb intact.
Otherwise, they would not have been able to do that.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, right, like they did
It
it
was,
with Rebecca.
yeah, it was a
They did it for
necessity.
Rebecca.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And in our passage, there's another person who dies who doesn't get involved, right? So
Joseph.
there'll be another thing to talk about when we get to that. Yeah, so yeah, interesting that they embalm. Now, you know, you could make the, you could try to make the case that Joseph was sort of caving into the Egyptian culture here, but I don't see that as what's happening. I see this as maybe a nod to Egyptian practices, but it was for a different reason. And in our day and age, it's pretty common for Christians or non-Christians. There's different ways that we deal with a dead body, right? Sometimes we bury people, right? What's another way that we deal with dead bodies? Cremation, right? I don't know about you, but my father was cremated, right? It's a pretty common practice now. Back in the earliest days of Christianity, cremation was a sign of unfaithfulness to Jesus. You weren't allowed to be cremated. Christians buried their dead. They didn't cremate their dead because it was a pagan custom to burn your dead, right? The pagans believed that your body was worthless, and so it was burned as though it was garbage, right? So for Christians, no, we don't do that, right? Because what it means is the body doesn't matter. So because of the meaning of cremation back in the first century, Christians forbade cremation. Is that what cremation means now?
Yeah.
That the body is garbage and we can just throw it away? No,
No,
right? You know, we with cremation these days, you know, we usually have them in a nice, you know, casket, and we'll bury the ashes. Even. Some people will turn them into jewelry, right? Or there's different things you can do with the ashes. But the idea here is that it's not mistreating the body, and we find ways to honor the body through cremation. It doesn't mean the same thing, and so the forbidding of the practice back in those days, back in the days of Jesus and the earliest apostles, doesn't apply anymore because cremation doesn't mean the same thing. For Joseph here, embalming his father didn't mean the same thing that it would have meant to the Egyptians. And because it was for a different reason, it wasn't forbidden, right? Joseph still believed, that Joseph and Jacob clearly believed in a Jewish view of the afterlife, being gathered to your fathers, and also being buried in the land of the promise was vital and important. So this isn't capitulation to the culture. This is reinterpretation of the practice and practicality. Yeah. Good observation, Kevin. Thank you. What else? What did you notice?
Pastor,
Chemical.
I noticed that the Egyptian mourned with Joseph, even though Jacob was not related to them.
Yeah, so there was a great deal of mourning, and I'm going to piggyback that off of Mary's observation. Mary's observation was that embalming took 40 days. It was a 40-day process, right? And there was 70 days of mourning, right? Now, it could be that this 70 days includes the 40 days of embalming and 30 days of extended grieving. Later on in the Old Testament, it's the standard Israelite period of mourning to mourn for 30 days after the burial, right? So you'll see that as you read through the Old Testament, characters die, it'll say, and they mourn for 30 days. So it would make sense that this was 40 days of embalming, 30 days of grieving, turning out to be 70 days. The other thing that we know is that the standard period of mourning for a pharaoh in Egypt was 72 days. We have, the Egyptians left many, many records, right? Egyptians were great record keepers and great writers, and they stored their records very securely, so that we have many, many records about the time of the pharaohs. 72 days was a standard mourning period for a pharaoh, which puts the mourning for Jacob almost to the length of the king of the world, which is pretty significant, I think, for the Egyptians. And you're right, and I don't know who said it, that Jacob wasn't an Egyptian, and yet the Egyptians mourned along with Joseph and his family. What else did you notice?
Joseph had to ask for favor from Pharaoh to take his father back to Canaan.
All right, so Joseph asks for permission from Pharaoh. How did that happen?
The servants, Pharaoh's servants,
Yeah, okay, so he asked the servants to ask
which
Pharaoh.
I find interesting that he didn't feel comfortable enough to go to Pharaoh himself.
So what do you think is going on here? So why would Joseph ask the servants? So remember that one of our principles is read it until it's weird, right? So here's a weird thing. Why doesn't Joseph just go to Pharaoh direct to ask for him?
Humbling himself.
Perhaps it's a humbling, maybe. Other thoughts?
Not trusting God to allow him to do what.
Okay, so that's a possibility. He doesn't trust in God. I would think the rest of the passage would say that's not the case.
Right.
But it is something that we could explore. Other thoughts?
Pastor? One thing that came to me why Joseph would speak through Pharaoh's servant as supposedly going directly to Pharaoh himself, since he was Pharaoh's right-hand man, was maybe because he had a dead in his household or in his family. It was not permitted for him to enter to speak to Pharaoh.
That's another possibility, that maybe the fact that Joseph had recent contact with a dead body, that he was actually taking care of a dead body at that time, put a roadblock in his ability to talk to Pharaoh directly. I think that's an interesting possibility. Certainly in Israel later on, people were considered unclean if they touched a dead body. I don't know that if that was the case for Egyptians, but certainly Egyptians had a strong premium on questions about life and death. And they did a whole lot of ceremony, as evidenced by the embalming. Their ideas about what to do with a dead body or how dead bodies affect you were very strong. I think it's a possibility that Joseph, because he was taking care of a dead body, didn't have the ability to talk to Pharaoh directly.
I'm gonna go with the humbling idea.
That's also a possibility, right? Maybe he's showing Pharaoh that he is submitted to Pharaoh in this. Yeah.
That's what it reminded me of, because I thought the same thing when I first read it. I thought, why would he ask permission?
Yeah.
Then I realized Pharaoh was still above Joseph.
Yes. Could be.
Servants.
Could be. Yeah.
Pastor,
Go ahead.
besides the 70 days of mourning in Egypt, then there were another 7 in Canaan. So in reality, that would make 77 more than a Pharaoh would get.
Whoa, okay. Good point. Good point. All right. So we have 7 more days when they arrive in Canaan. This 7 days is just the family, right? This 40 days with the Egyptians in country, 30 days with the Egyptians after the embalming is done, and then 7 more days once they arrive at Abel Mizraim. That's a total of 77 days of mourning. It's more than mourning for a pharaoh. What else is interesting about 77 days?
Well, the Egyptians were involved in it.
Yep, yep. Talk to me about that. What do you mean?
Well, they went all in a great big mass. a great big company, the elders of Egypt and the elders of his household, the elders of Egypt, as well as the household of Joseph and his fathers. They were in a great company, but they were with chariots and horsemen. And when they got there, the Canaanites saw that, they said, this is a grievous mourning by the Egyptians.
Yeah, well, true, yeah, yeah. So, so I was wrong to say this is just the family, this is the family and the Egyptians. Yeah, so 77 days of mourning here with the family and the Egyptians. What else is interesting about 77 as a number?
Eternal,
Yeah, it's two sevens, right?
yeah.
It's 7 times 10 plus 7. Has that 7-ish character, and 7 being
Yeah.
an important number.
Yeah.
Talk to me about, so what?
Because it's Jacob and it's Israel.
Yeah.
So they're gonna mourn it forever.
Yeah, eternal mourning. What else? So talk to me about, you had read through a bunch of different words about the company that left Egypt. Tell me what in leaving Egypt.
Had to be like an exodus.
Yeah.
All the
Lots
servants
of
of
people.
Pharaoh.
Okay, so we have servants of Pharaoh is one phrase.
This is all the servants of Pharaoh. How did Pharaoh function?
The elders,
The elders of his household.
The elders.
All the elders of the land,
What else?
yeah,
as well as the house of Joseph. And there went up both chariots and horsemen.
Chariots and horsemen.
his brothers,
It was a very great company.
And a great
yeah, there
company.
we go.
Right, you had the household of Joseph, his brothers, and his father's house.
And yeah, so on the part of the Egyptians, we have servants of Pharaoh, all the elders, chariots and horsemen, a great company. And on the Israelite side, we have Joseph's brothers. There's also a mention of, although they don't go with them, there's an actual mention of the children.
Yeah, they stayed behind.
Yeah, they stayed behind,
They stay
With
behind.
the flocks.
because
Yeah, no
right,
children.
Joseph had promised to return.
Here's an interesting thing, and maybe you understand, maybe you already know what I'm gonna say with this, but these words here, these phrases will show up again the next time that Joseph departs from Egypt. Okay? That's not in Genesis.
Would be an exodus.
It would be an Exodus, right? Servants of Pharaoh, elders, chariots and horsemen, a great company. You're going to see all those words used again in the book of Exodus for when the children of Israel leave. You said it was like an Exodus. I think that's exactly what we're supposed to see, right?
Yeah.
We're supposed to see this as a mini Exodus from Egypt, okay? This is, in a sense, it is sort of a precursor to the Exodus that's going to be written of in the book of Exodus, and which the first readers of Genesis have as history, right? The first readers of Genesis, remember we said this from the very beginning, you read Genesis as if it was written to the people who went through the Exodus. So they see this, they see these words, and they're like, oh yeah, that's very similar to when we left Egypt. So Joseph and Jacob and Jacob's body, right? So they're bringing the body of the patriarch Jacob with them in this mini Exodus. And of course, in the actual Exodus, they're going to bring the body of another patriarch with them into Canaan, Joseph. They'll be bringing his body with them. So we have a mini Exodus going on here in this passage, sort of setting the stage for what's going to come later. What else did you notice?
Pastor,
Yeah, Bev.
before Jacob was embalmed, Joseph fell on his face, wept over him, and kissed him.
Mm.
So there was a lot of emotion
Yeah.
in there. And I'm not sure what falling on the face, does that have a significant meaning? The only thing I could see is thinking of the eyes, that you wouldn't see this person anymore.
Yeah, I don't know of any particular meaning to it other than just it's showing his abject sadness. And of course, Chris had mentioned earlier that God had promised to Jacob that Joseph would close his eyes in death. And so it might have a connection to that there as well. A friend of mine this past week went to a wedding. The Orthodox Christian tradition. My friend is an Orthodox Christian. And he's kind of socially awkward. My friend is, he's a nerd. He's kind of socially awkward, a Bible nerd as well. And in an Orthodox wedding, the whole congregation passes by and they kiss the bride and groom. Part of it. So my friend, what he said to the bride and groom was, he said, of course, the next time everybody kisses you will be at your funeral. Because in an Orthodox funeral, you kiss the body as well. So that reminded me of that this year. And my friend is not like I said, he's a little socially awkward. I think he realized afterwards that's maybe not what you say at a wedding. But yeah, Joseph weeps on his father's face and kisses him. It's a sign of his love and his respect for his father. And it was not considered a weird thing in that culture. It would be weird, if I passed away and had an open casket funeral here and you all filed by and kissed my body, kissed my head or whatever, everybody would be grossed out. Don't do that. Right? You don't touch the dead body. That was not the case here. This was normal. What else?
Pastor,
Nicole.
when it spoke about all the elders of Pharaoh's household, what I noticed, it wasn't just of Pharaoh's household, but of the entire land of Egypt. All the elders from the entire land of Egypt went with Joseph.
Yeah. So what does this tell you about this funeral?
It's huge.
It's huge. Yeah. Enormous. And you say important?
Yeah.
So what sort of importance? Why would it be important to these Egyptian elders to take part in this funeral?
Because it was Joseph's father,
And
It's fun to recognize who he is.
and because Joseph was who he was, the second in
Yeah.
command.
Joseph is the vizier of Egypt. He's the second in command. Of course you're going to go to the funeral. Yeah, of course you're going to go to the funeral. You know what side your bread is buttered on. You know that this is the guy who made sure that you had bread to butter in the first place, right? Of course you're going to go to that funeral. It's a state funeral, right? It's a state funeral. This is the burial of a dignitary, and all the dignitaries come to this funeral, even though it's a 77-day funeral. They come, right? Because it's that important to show that kind of respect, and I think also to be seen, right? You pay your respects in order to gain some favor with Joseph, maybe. I'm not saying that all of these people were not completely sincere in their grief, but I am saying that's unlikely, right? It's much more likely that there is some genuine sense of loss. Maybe Jacob was considered a great man in Egypt. Certainly Joseph is. But also there's a sense of currying favor that comes along with a state funeral.
Well, Pastor,
Yeah, Bev?
they're showing great honor to him by such a big, so many people accompanying
Yeah.
them.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it becomes such a such a great honor that it becomes known to the Canaanites of the land, right? And it becomes a thing that changes the name of a place.
Yeah.
It's that significant of a deal. Of course, for us, even if some of the participants were doing it to curry favor, we look at it and we see a fulfillment of God's promise that those who bless you, I will bless, right? That through you, all the nations on earth will be blessed. There's a sense in which Jacob is the person through whom the blessing is coming. And so the fact that all the nations on earth, or all the dignitaries of Egypt in this case, are coming to this funeral is a sign of God on the way of fulfilling these promises, right? He's bringing that kind of prominence to his servant. Excellent, excellent, excellent. I want to talk about Abel Mitzrayim. Abel Mitzrayim is an interesting little play on words. Mitzrayim is Egyptians, right? That's what it means. Mitzrayim is Egyptians. That's what it means in Hebrew. You have the im ending there, which is a plural ending. So Mitzrayim is the people of Egypt. But Abel is a play on words. So there's the place was, we know from archaeology that the place was known as Ebel Mitzrayim before this. Ebel Mitzrayim, Ebel means brook or stream, the stream of the Egyptians or the brook of the Egyptians. And Abel means mourning. Abel Mitzrayim. And so there's this little play on words there between Ebel and Abel Mitzrayim. They love their plays on words. Yeah. What else?
So he was buried where he wanted to be buried.
Right.
Where
So,
God told him he would be buried.
so talk to me about where he is buried. What is significant about the place where he is buried?
Abraham bought it.
It was,
Abraham bought it. Yeah. So this cave, the cave of Machpelah and the field around it, is the only land in the promised land that the promised family owns. Right? This is their plot. It's a burial plot, but this is the plot that they own. They have a deed to it. And every time it's mentioned, it says that Abraham bought this from Ephron the Hittite. And he possesses it. Why does it matter that he possesses land in Canaan?
Well, he's keeping faithful to God's promise that they're going to return there.
What were the three promises that God made in the covenant that he made with Abraham?
Land,
One is land, yeah,
descendants.
descendants,
And relationship.
and a relationship. I will be with you, right? I'm going to give you land, right? I'm going to give you descendants, and you'll have a relationship with me, God. So far, this is the entire fulfillment so far of this promise, right? At this point in the story, the land that they own is this burial plot. But that's significant because they do own it, right? But by the end of the book of Genesis, the land promise has a tiny little fulfillment. By the end of the book of Genesis, the descendants promise has a tiny little fulfillment. There's 70 some odd people who came into Egypt. We'll find out how many there are when we get to the book of Exodus who leave Egypt, right? And the relationship with God is expressed in the trust that Jacob has in asking to be buried in Egypt, or in Canaan, right? He's trusting in God's promises, so he wants his body to be in the land that God promised. That's where he wants his dead body to be. If there's disputes over whether they believed in anything like resurrection, I think they did. But even if resurrection wasn't an idea for them yet, still, he wanted his body to be buried in the promised land. That's a gesture of faith that there's something else coming, and I want to be part of it because it's coming here. Okay. What else did you notice? So they come back from the funeral. Funeral's over. They've had their chicken dinner and we're washing up the plates. What's the first thing that's on Joseph's brothers' minds?
That he's
He's gonna get even with us.
now that their father's gone.
Yeah, all right. So
They still don't trust Joseph.
they still don't trust Joseph. Like, so it's been 17 years, right? And my assumption is he hasn't done anything to them,
No.
but blessed them.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But 17 years later, they're still troubled. Still troubled. Uh-oh. So what's their solution to this? They lied to him. Right?
Yeah, they lied.
We have no indication that Jacob actually said any of this stuff. They say, oh, your father gave us this command. Say to Joseph,
Before he
please,
died.
before he died.
The funny thing is, Jacob gave them all their blessing. I would think that he would have said something to Joseph and to the other brothers about, don't hold it against them.
Yeah.
So it made me laugh when I read that.
It seems transparently silly,
Mhm.
right? That Joseph is not going to believe this, right?
Yeah.
And B, why don't they trust him in the first place? I mean, hasn't he given them every indication that he has forgiven them? And they ask twice, right? Say to Joseph, they put it in their father's mouth, please forgive the transgression. And then they say it in their own words. And now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father. They ask for forgiveness. They don't come out and say what they did, but they hint at it, right? Forgive the transgression and their sin. Please, so there's
And
two
they
words.
called it evil too, because they.
So, okay, great. Yes, we have three words that are used for it, right? One is transgression. The other one is evil. And the third word is sin. Those are three different words in Hebrew. Between those three words, you're covering the whole field, right? That's all the bad stuff. Transgression, evil, and sin. Please forgive our transgression. Please forgive our evil. Please forgive our sin. How does that make Joseph feel?
He cries.
Oh, he wept.
He cries.
Broke his heart, I'm sure.
Yeah.
To think that they, after all this, and all that he's done for them, that they would still be afraid.
Exactly.
I think that would be my interpretation of it as well. This breaks Joseph's heart. After all I've done, right? You still are afraid of me. They bow to him and they say, behold, we are your servants. So Joseph's response has three components theologically, right? The first one is, do not fear, for am I in the place of God? Right, so here's part one is, I'm not God. That's sort of theological principle number one. I'm not God. Why? What would that mean? Why would he say that? Why does it say, am I in the place of God?
Not for him to judge them.
Right. I'm not your judge. I'm not your judge. You don't fear me. I'm not your judge, right? I'm not God. The second thing that Joseph says is, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. What you meant for evil, God meant for good. Talk to me about that. I think I just paraphrased it, but as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. Talk to me about that phrase. What do you see there? What's interesting to you about that phrase?
Pastor?
Yeah, Nicole.
Yeah, before I tied into that, before that was after Joseph wept, and it says his brothers all came and fell down before him and said, behold your servant. So what I saw first was the total fulfillment of Joseph's dreams, because they had bowed down before him, but now they're saying, we belong to you, we are your servants. So when he said, don't fear, but he added to that, God meant it for good to bring about that many people should be kept alive as there are today. And I think he was talking about his family, because there would come this time when he would have needed to save them, which was the famine that they had experienced where they were, and then they had to come to Egypt.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. I see Bev's unmuted. Did you have something, Bev?
No.
So yeah, what do you see in this idea here? What you meant for evil, God meant for good. What strikes you about it?
God's gonna keep the promise. God's plan is gonna happen no matter what.
Yeah, so this is,
People can go against it, but it's still gonna happen.
He can take evil intentions, turn it around for good.
this is God's signature, right? This is God's thumbprint. It is the thing that identifies the work of God, is that God takes what you meant for evil and he turns it into good. Which is, I think, in my mind, one of the most important principles in the entire Bible, is that God takes what you meant for evil and he turns it into good. And he does it consistently. He does it across the board. It is the principle behind the cross. It is the principle behind death and resurrection. It is the principle that underlies the greatest truths of the Bible, that what you meant for evil, God meant for good. God takes, I would, as an Arminian, I would translate that as what you intended for evil, God takes that evil and he transforms it into good, or he brings good out of it. If I were a Calvinist, I might say something like, God's intentions behind your evil were for good, right? That God had you do evil so that good might result. Either way, the idea here is the sovereignty of God, to the extent that nothing is going to escape his plan, right? Nothing is going to derail the plan of God to bless the world and to bless his people. Also, I want you to pay attention to two specific words here: evil and good, right? One of the things we've been saying throughout Genesis is that this pair of words is a major theme in the book. From the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, to God warning Laban not to speak good or evil, to Jacob, this idea that good and evil are a pair of words that present the contrast, the major contrast between God's way and the way of sin, right? What you meant for evil, God meant for good. Here we have this pair, which we had way back at the beginning and we had sprinkled throughout. Now this pair of words shows up here again in the very last passage, right? In fact, it shows up in what I would argue is the theme of the book of Genesis. What you meant for evil, God meant for good. This is, if you're asking me, what's Genesis about? It's about that. We've spent a lot of time in the book of Genesis and seen a whole lot of stuff. when most people think about the book of Genesis, they think about it as the book that has creation in it. It does. That is an important theme in the book of Genesis. I would say creation is one of the top themes. But it's not the only theme, and it's not even the biggest theme in the book of Genesis. What you meant for evil, God meant for good, I think is the theme, right? When you go back and you look at Adam and Eve, Adam and Eve sin against God. They meant evil. Satan is the serpent, right? Intends evil. And yet God has already brought tremendous good out of it by the end of the book of Genesis, and there's more good to come. This contrast between evil and good and God's work to bring good out of evil, I think is the central bit of the book of Genesis. There's a lot of other stuff too. When we get to the themes, there's a lot of things to notice, but I would argue that's the main theme of the book. This is the theology of the book in a sentence. And of course, is the theme of saving lives, right? That's the third theological point that Joseph makes, is that in the end, your lives were saved. I'm not God. I'm not going to judge you. Theologically, God had a sovereign plan behind all of it. And thirdly, I saved your life. Right? Why am I going to kill you now? I could have killed you then, right? I had 17 years to kill you. I'm not going to kill you. In fact, I'm not just going to not kill you. I'm going to provide for you and your little one. What else did you notice?
Well, I think he makes it a point of showing them, I will provide.
He said, do not fear a couple of times.
Yeah, do not fear as a repeated phrase. And Joseph, the second in command, is going to be providing for them. And they're little, take care of them.
Pastor,
Yeah, Bev.
Joseph comforted them and spoke kindly to them after they lied to him.
Yeah, that is Joseph, right? I mean, he's returning good for evil. I don't know how evil it is. I don't know how evil their lie is. I mean, obviously it's desperate, it's silly, it's sad. It is a sin. It's not the biggest, it's not the most wrong thing they've ever done to him.
No.
You know, but Joseph consistently returns good for evil, which again is a very godlike thing to do. Mary pointed out that Joseph lives 110 years. I had mentioned a couple of passages ago that 110 years is the ideal age for Egyptians. Like if you lived a good long life in Egypt, 110 was the number that they gave you, right? If you look, again, Egyptians were meticulous record keepers. Doesn't mean that everything they wrote was exactly true, but when they record the dates of death of their pharaohs, what you see is, oh, it could be 110, 110, 110, 110, right? To the point where it becomes ridiculous, right? No, but that's impossible.
Right.
But 110 was the ideal lifespan in Egypt. And so here Joseph hits that number and hits it exactly, which I mean, does Genesis mean for it to be literal? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know, but it certainly is there.
And Jacob lived, what, 137?
Yeah, 147.
147.
Right, and I had done this little thing, I don't, again, I said this back when I did it, I don't really understand it, but because I'm not a numbers guy, but you might remember that I did this little algorithm, and like, I'm gonna erase this. You all know, look, listen, you can say it in your sleep now. This little algorithm, right, about the lifespan of Abraham who lived 175 years, right? Which equals 5 times 5 times 7, okay? And then Isaac
108.
was to 180, right? Which is 6 times 6 times 5. Okay, and then Jacob lived for 147 years, which is 7 times 7 times 3. Okay, and so what you see here is this column will call, these two columns will call the square, right? So 5 squared, 6 squared, and 7 squared, plus 7 times 7, or times 5, or times 3. So the number in the square column goes up by 1, and the number of the multiplier goes down by 2. Well, if you take Joseph at 110, it continues this trajectory. It is as 1. No,
Oh, 64 times 1.
because we have to go down to times 1.
Yeah.
I read it in the commentary today. I didn't actually sit down and do the math. It wasn't 7. I said, oh, that's what it is. That's what it is. It is 5 squared plus 6 squared plus 7 squared
Oh,
times 1 is what it is. So it's taking this number, and this number, adding them together. 5 squared is 25, 6 squared is 36, 7 squared is 47,
49.
49. Thanks, school teacher. I hope this is correct, because
And then we had to add them.
uh,
11, 20.
and then 7, 8, 9, 2, yeah, 110,
Oh, there we go.
right? So it's 5 squared plus 6 squared plus 7 squared times 1.
Who figures this out? This is crazy.
Jews, right? The numerologists, we've talked about this in the past, that there are strong strains of numerology in some parts of the Jewish faith. So they sit down and calculate these things. But it is interesting. It's intriguing. I don't know what it means. I don't know if it means anything. What it could mean is that Joseph's life was the culmination of the patriarchs before him, right? The ultimate culmination of their lives, as found in the number of years that he lived.
And what they said before is just that it's not random.
Right.
That's the point.
Right.
It's not, it's a plan. And it's all beforehand. It's not a plan as we just make it up as we go.
Right.
It's planned before they were born.
All right. Couple other things that I want to notice. Let me just open it up to you though. So what else was interesting to you as you went through?
Pastor,
Yeah, Nicole.
what I noticed was that when Joseph knew he was gonna die and he wanted them to swear that they were gonna bring his body back to where he should be buried, he didn't say, then Joseph made the sons of Israel. So he didn't say Joseph made his brothers swear, but it said made the sons of Israel swear, as opposed to say Joseph made his brothers swear.
Yeah. So what do you think that means, Nicole? Why would the narrator use sons of Israel?
I am thinking one, it has to do with however what was divvied up or blessed with them, and as he was speaking to them not just as his brother, but the future tribe, because they were going to be in Egypt for a long time before they could have the Exodus. So he knew, and this is another interesting thing, how he was going to die there. He knew he was going to have to stay in Egypt. So he's probably thinking, well, it might not be this generation, but maybe, and I think that's why it made mention that he saw Ephraim's children to the 3rd generation. That must have told him, okay, it might not be this generation when we get out of Egypt, but whenever you do go, take my body out. So instead of saying the brothers, because the brothers were going to die eventually, and some of their children would probably die, but then he swore to them collectively as the tribes of Israel, this is what you should do.
There's a lot that you've said there. I want to tease out a few things. One is, some of these people who swear may not be his brothers, right? They may be his brother's descendants. Joseph was one of the youngest ones. Maybe some of his brothers have died, and the people who he's having to swear are the leaders of their tribes, right? Their descendants. I think you're right to say, Nicole, that he is not talking to them as his brothers, even if they are. He's talking to them as the leaders of the tribe. This becomes a solemn oath sworn by the leaders of the nation, right? So this is a big deal. And so you don't just say his brothers here, you're going to say sons of Israel, partly because some of them might not be his brothers, and partly because who they are is the tribal leaders, and they're making a national commitment to Joseph here. So that's really key. And the third thing that you said that I think is really important is that that the commitment that they're making is to bring his bones out in the future, sometime in the future. He is trusting that there will come a time when they will leave, and they're going to be leaving to go to Canaan. They're all going to the promised land. And when you go to the promised land, carry up my bones from here. I mentioned a few classes ago that Hebrews chapter 11, the hall of faith in the New Testament, Hebrews chapter 11 said that Jacob used what it has each patriarch sort of what's the most faith-filled thing they ever did, right? And when it talks about Jacob, it's that he blessed the sons of Joseph while leaning on his staff, which doesn't seem to us like the most faith-filled thing Jacob ever did. But when the writer of Hebrews looks back on it, that's what he sees. And when the writer of Hebrews looks back on Joseph, he says, by faith, Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave directions concerning his bones.
Yeah.
Right? This is Joseph's premier act of faith, saying that there's going to be an exodus. And when that happens, bring my bones up out of Egypt.
And he's telling them that God will bring you up.
Yes, okay. So he says actually that God will visit you.
Surely visit you.
God will visit you. God will visit you, right? There's this word visit is going to be a key word in the book of Exodus. We'll see this as we start the book of Exodus and the sermons. You'll see that God indeed has visited his people. This visit word, I think it's unfortunate translation into English. It's not a great, it does mean visit, but it means in power, right? It's not just, oh, hey, I was driving by and I stopped in, right?
Yeah.
Or I wanted to sit down for 15 minutes for a chat. It means brings his power and majesty to bear, right? That's what visitation means in this context. He's saying that God is going to visit you in power. He's going to come in power and do something mighty. Now let's take a step back and look at this. Why will God need to do something mighty? Like, why would Joseph even think that God would have to do something mighty? Things are good. They're liked and loved and respected, right? But Joseph knows that's not going to be the case forever. Maybe it's already starting to not be the case. Maybe in the lifetime of Joseph, things are turning. And he can see which way the wind is shining, as my friend says. And okay, something's happening here. This is starting to turn bad, and it's going to require the hand of God visiting you to bring you out.
Yeah, that's the plan.
Eventually, yeah, right, yeah. It will take God's mighty hand to get them out of Egypt.
Says they embalmed him
They did embalm him, yeah.
and he was put in a coffin.
That word coffin is interesting. It's translated in the book of Exodus, it's translated Ark. So it's the same word for the Ark of the Covenant. They put him in an ark. I don't know if it's the same word as the Ark of Noah. I didn't look that up, but it is the same word as the Ark of the Covenant. So they're going to be carrying an ark out of Egypt, which contains Joseph's embalmed body and bones.
Because I didn't remember that. That they took Joseph with them when they left.
Yeah. So it's going to be interesting when I'm preaching through Exodus. That won't happen. That passage won't be this year. It'll be middle of next year. Because when the Exodus finally happens in Exodus 17 is when it's made mention. So we'll be 17 chapters into Exodus before this will come up. But you know it's coming, right?
Yeah.
Because you've studied Genesis, so you know it's coming.
So I also thought it was interesting that Joseph, they mentioned that he sees Ephraim's children to the third generation, which is not a big deal. But the fact that he also mentions Manasseh, who was not the heir.
Yeah.
So that in Joseph's mind, he
He's still-
almost sees them as equal.
He's still adopting his firstborn sons
Yeah.
as his own. That's interesting. Yeah. The last interesting thing I want to point out, and we'll move to sort of themes, is line 18. God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. This is the first time in the Bible that those three names are used in this way, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Of course, before this, it was Abraham and Isaac, right? In the stories of Isaac, it was swore to Abraham. But now it's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And you will, as you read through the Old Testament, you'll see that trio of names used together all over the place. And here's the first appearance of it in the Bible. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. All right, talk to me about themes. Let's move from looking at the passage to listening to the passage. I'm going to erase the math here, which is, to me, interesting, but not as interesting as the rest. So what's this passage trying to teach us? What are the themes of this passage?
Good versus evil, definitely.
What is it saying about good and evil?
Good is going to triumph.
Good will triumph.
God will turn evil to good.
God turns evil to good. Yeah, I think that's great, right? Good is going to triumph because God will turn evil to good, or bring good out of evil. Yeah, that's a key theme, and again, I would say that's the theme of Genesis, and I would say that it sets up one of the biggest themes in the Bible. What else do you see? What other themes arise up out of this passage?
God keeps his promise.
Boom!
Well, yeah. You want to say that one?
God keeps his promises, right? That is, I mean, this is our last chance to have that in the book of Genesis, right? God keeps his promises. And Genesis is a book of making and keeping promises. God making and keeping promises, people making and breaking promises, but God showing himself to be faithful to the end. From page 1 to page 96, God keeping his promises. What else?
Pastor? Pastor?
Yes.
In the same line of God keeping his promises, what actually stood out to me was at the end of page 96, when he swore to them to carry his bones out. And I'm thinking, he's been in Egypt all this time. He didn't have to say, take my bones out. He could have been buried in Egypt in a fancy way like the pharaohs or whatever. But it also points to the promise of what he had learned about as a child about the Israelites inheriting that land. And I'm thinking in life, he didn't inherit it, but in death, he would be buried in the promised land. So that's still God keeping his promise, whether Joseph was alive or dead, his body would be in the promised land.
So let me propose a theme, a way to write this theme out. How about this? Faith is expressed in looking for a land after death. Right? Joseph's faith is expressed by the fact that he's looking forward to the God's promised land even after death, right? That's sort of the hook of Joseph's faith, is that it's a faith that pierces beyond death, right? Joseph did a lot of faith-filled things, right? He trusted in God when he was in prison. He trusted in God when he rejected Potiphar's wife's advances, right? He trusted God when he forgave his brothers. All those important things that he trusted God for. When he interpreted Pharaoh's dreams, when he gave Pharaoh a plan to work out that dream into reality. Joseph had faith throughout his life, but what Hebrews points at is a faith that transcends death, right? What matters to the book of Hebrews is this is a faith that goes beyond death, and that's where this faith is really shines forth in the life of Joseph, and that's how it shined forth in the life of Jacob when he blessed Ephraim and Manasseh, who he made into tribes who would thrive in the future, right? This idea of a land after death. And Abraham, again, Hebrews says by faith, Abraham, by faith, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, right? Abraham trusted that there was going to be a life after death for Isaac. That's the pure expression of Abraham's faith, is that death is not the end. Right?
Yeah, if you take out the part about looking for a land, faith is expressed after death. That's the resurrection, that's eternal life.
It's a faith in life after death, right?
Yeah.
Especially important in a book that starts with a story where God says to them, you will surely die, right? Adam and Eve's sin brings about death, but the faith of the characters of the book of Genesis is a faith that goes beyond death, that looks forward beyond death to the promise of God, which is expressed in land, it's expressed in life, it's expressed in descendants, relationship that goes beyond death, which is powerful and it speaks to us, definitely even today. I'm going to throw one more theme out there that's a theme from the book. Not so much a theme here, although it is to some degree. Genesis is a book of covenants and blessings. Covenants and blessings. We see the covenant part here as the narrator talks about land and descendants and relationships, right? Those are the three components of the covenant that we've been isolating through. So covenant is definitely there. Blessings, you had to sort of pull it out, but blessing was a major thing in the last couple of passages as well. From the very beginning of Genesis, where God creates Adam and Eve and blesses them. Says to them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth, right? Exercise dominion over all things. The theme of blessing has been part of Genesis from the beginning. And when Adam and Eve sin against God and God meets with Abraham, right? And makes a covenant with Abraham, this theme of covenants enters in. And we see the covenant made with Abraham, the promise that God winds up keeping, right? This is a key theme of the book of Genesis, right? Good and evil covenants and blessings, God keeping his promises, and a faith that goes beyond death, that God is going to triumph. This is the story of the book of Genesis. It's a mighty, majestic book. It does have themes of creation, right? So even here, what you see is the creation of the nation of Israel in many ways happening here. So creation is not just Genesis 1 through 3. There's creation happening all throughout. But I think these themes are just as powerful, just as important as the theme of creation is in the book of Genesis.
And then there's also honor your father.
Sure.
All the fathers. in
Yeah.
Genesis, all the way back to Adam.
So on the positive side, honor your father. On the negative side, the family garbage that happens when you start to love one person more than another, when you start to favor one child and disfavor another,
Oh, yeah.
the family dynamics when you refuse to do the right thing because you're super protective of your kids, or like all that family dynamics is definitely a theme of the book of Genesis on the human side of things, right? And it's a story about real human beings making real human stupid decisions and sort of fighting their way towards a maturity of faith that takes a lifetime to realize.
Yeah, I'm just thinking like on the deathbed, each father made a promise or made a request or a command, and every son obeyed it.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Boy, we should have such mothers.
Oh, well, that's the rest of the commandments. I mean,
Well,
they just didn't talk about.
on your
this.
deathbed, you make your kid promise something, I bet they will follow through. I bet they will follow. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who their mom or their dad on their deathbed make some stupid promise. No offense, but I deal with a lot of families at time of death or even after, and a lot of moms and dads make their kids promise stupid things that wind up being ultimately harmful to the kid as they're trying to carry it out. But kids take their parents' dying wishes very seriously. I wind up having to tell people, look, she's dead.
Most of us heard.
This promise is going to wreck you. This promise is going to be harmful to your kids. You don't have to follow through on a harmful promise. Or this promise was just crazy go nuts from the beginning. We're not always in our best frame of mind when we're dying.
I guess not.
You're not catching me at my best.
So he gives them like man and then.
Yeah, so Joseph seems very lucid and faith-filled. I hope I'm like that when I get to my head. I'm sure I'm going to be making them promise something about like binge watching Star Trek or something. I'm going to be on Looney Tunes when I'm dead. All right, let's take a couple of minutes now. So these are the themes of our passage, book of Genesis as well. Maybe these are things that have spoken to you tonight. Maybe something else has spoken to you tonight. I don't know. God uses his word in mighty and majestic ways. So I want to take 2 minutes just to spend some time in prayer and ask the Lord, okay, what is it that you wanted to say to me tonight? What do you want me to carry away from this study? Take a couple minutes to write it down. Pray to write it down. All right. As always, when you're listening to God, it's between you and God. I'm not interested in making you share, or if it's something that's private between you and God, it's between you and God. But if you feel like you'd like to share, if there's something that God said to you that you think will be a blessing to other people, I do want to give you the opportunity to share what God said to you tonight.
Pastor House.
Yeah, Carol.
As I was sitting here, I feel like I was just kind of reflecting on this whole study that we did. And you had said in the beginning, did you say we've been working on this over 2 years?
Yes.
And I just want to say, I can't believe how much I got out of this. And just like you said at the beginning of this, that you were helping to teach us not just about the book of Genesis, but even how to read scripture and what to be thinking about. And I like almost feel like we need like a graduation ceremony. Like, look, we did that. We got to the end. But I just want to thank you so much for your commitment and your teaching. And I just appreciate it so much. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're very welcome. I was sitting there thinking, I can't believe that I just led a Bible study that lasted over 2 years. Never happened in my entire life. I'm 50 years
Best
old.
one ever.
Yeah, I'm used to studies that are, 6 months or what, Sunday school quarter or 6 weeks.
Revelation didn't take us this long.
It was a tremendous accomplishment, and you're welcome. And also thank you guys for being part of it, because it is a long haul working through Genesis. The only reason I'm not going to Exodus is I just don't think I can handle doing an even longer book in manuscript form next. I want to do a short, punchy book that has short, punchy passages.
I'm gonna do every book in the Bible.
Yeah, me too. Sure, eventually. But I appreciate your word there, Carol, because the truth is, for me, this is the way I read the Bible. Right? This is why, for me, going into my office on a Monday morning and saying, okay, what's my next passage to preach on is exciting. I love doing the next passage, because the next passage is going to have deep riches for me personally, as well as for the congregation. And this manuscript Bible study method, it's not magic. It's not, you don't have to study the Bible this way. But for me, it revolutionizes my life every time I do it. It really is that kind of thing for me. This, not everybody learns this way, but I do. And so I get excited by it, and it makes me excited to go into the Word every time I get the chance to preach. And so, it has been my hope that you'll catch that excitement, the same excitement that I have, that you'll have that excitement when you look into the Word, because truly there are riches in every passage. And one of the exciting things to me about the Genesis study is going through passages that, honestly, I thought were dead. Like I've never done this kind of study at this length before. There'll be times when I've been sitting in my office prepping for this study, and I'll finish my prep and I'm like, oh, this passage stinks. What are we doing here? And so I come into class, and you guys bring out all this great stuff, and I leave going, I get home and Karina says, how is the Bible study? I say, I can't believe how much is in this passage that I thought was terrible. I get that, and we get that all the time. And I'm glad that you guys are catching that too, because it's, yeah. So you're welcome, and thank you for being on the journey.
Yeah, thank you.
Pastor,
Yeah, Bev.
I was going to say basically the same thing. Thank you. And this study has been a blessing, such a blessing. And I also appreciate everyone who has taken part and their comments and insights.
Amen.
All that we've shared has been great.
Amen.
Thank you. You too.
Yeah, you too, Bev, absolutely. And it is a privilege to study together.
It is.
I definitely get more out of this because you guys are here.
Yeah, it does help to have
Yeah.
a study buddy.
And as far as your question, I was going to say, from the themes, it really gives me a lot of peace to know that good will triumph.
Yeah.
And so for that reason, I don't worry about politics. I don't worry about the economy.
Yeah.
I don't worry about my deaths.
Yeah.
I have to say, I do worry about loved ones' deaths.
Sure,
I'm
sure.
not that good yet, but basically, I don't worry. Because I know good will, so I could care less what goes on. I don't watch the news. I could care less. Doesn't matter. God's gonna triumph. No problem.
I just did today, I recorded a daily devotional video for next week, when I'm gonna be away next week at the General Council of the Christian Missionary Alliance. So I've recorded a daily devotional based on the sermon I'll be preaching this Sunday. And the daily devotional is about praise. One of them is about praise. And but the question of what does praise do for your body? We're doing a study on your body, right? The theology of the body. The Bible has a few things to say about the relationship between praise and your body. And what the Bible says is that praise gives health to your body. A cheerful heart is good medicine, it says. So in the daily devotional, here's a little spoiler. The daily devotional I talk about is that praise, worship, gives hope, gives us hope, gives us joy, gives us hope. Because when we focus in on the things of God, and we focus in on the character of God, we focus in on the power of God, which is what praise is supposed to do. So keep our minds who God is.
And then
Transform. Just 1 second. It transforms our depression, right? Because when we look at ourselves, there's no hope. We look at politics, there's no hope. We look at, whatever. But when we look at God, there is hope. Yeah, Mom, go ahead.
Your father had he had a terrible mad and yelling and everything, had a difficult to deal with his anger. Yeah. And then he got into the habit of originally he hit things when he was mad, but he learned from the Lord that when he got angry, he ran into his car, put on some worship music, and he regarded it as a miracle because the first couple of minutes he was still, saying the wrong things. And gradually he started to praise God. And by the time when, a certain amount of time, he came out from the car worshiping God and was singing the songs what he was listening to, So the worship, the praise, truly redone his emotion at those times. So it gives you life.
It does give you life. And so focusing in on the fact that God is going to triumph, the character
Amen.
of God, and that God will win, does give us hope in every situation. And it's not pretending, not pretending that your emotions are different. It's not, making something up to cheer yourself up. It's focusing on
Amen.
the truth that God will triumph, the truth that good will win. That truth gives us hope. It's not pretending. It's not wishful thinking. It's truth. And so the praise that we have, that we sing, or that we proclaim, or however you like to praise,
Amen.
that gives us the hope that we need in every situation. I don't go into my car, but I do go into the sanctuary here. I'll go and I'll walk the aisles of the sanctuary in the dark. Usually I don't turn lights on. Walk in the aisles of the sanctuary in the dark, and I'll sing whatever songs are on my heart as a way to sort of focus my attention on God rather than on whatever is stressing me out that day.
Yeah. And what came to my mind was we may not see the promise come to fruition in our lifetime.
Yeah.
But we have God's promise that it will.
Yeah,
And
Amen.
we may see it, we may have to wait till we get to heaven to see it.
amen. Yeah.
That's the thing that
Yeah. So
it struck me. in
yeah.
this last
Right. Yeah. right. Yes, so
That's
when
our promise.
we
land.
talk about land and
Yeah.
descendants and relationships, one of the fun things to do is to say, okay, where do land, descendants, and relationships wind up in the gospel? Right? And the gospel, the land is the promised land is life eternal, right?
Right.
And in the gospel, descendants are brothers and sisters in Christ who are the great multitude that is, every language and people and nation and tribe, right? Who will praise God before the throne, right? That's where the descendants come in, right? And that comes through, not just through childbirth, but through evangelism, right? And then the question of having a relationship with God, I mean, obviously, that's what the core of the gospel is that Jesus forgives our sins so that we can have a relationship with God through him, a relationship that brings us into the promised land along with the great cloud of witnesses. The covenant is, we call it the new covenant, right? Jesus says the new covenant is my blood, but the promises are the same as in the old covenant. And it's really cool to watch that theme through the Bible and not just through Genesis. Thanks everybody for sharing. We are a little over time. I want to pray and we'll close our time. Heavenly Father, thank you for this evening. Thank you for your word. Thank you for this just real privilege to study Genesis for the last 2+ years. When we started the study, my son was part of the study and he had not yet gone to college. No, I know it's over 2 years. Lord, thank you. And God, I pray that you would take this word and plant it deep in our hearts. May our hearts be good soil. May the truth of your word give us hope. May the truth of your victory give us hope. May we give you praise for the good things that we see in your word. And Lord, I pray that every day as we look into your word, your Holy Spirit would help us to see wonderful things in your word. I don't have any homework for you.
Thank you, Pastor House.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi,
You,
Nana House.
bye.
Oh, and thank you for that cat to come on here. He